Max Clifford, how are you?
I'm very well, Alex, and you?
Yeah, I'm really good, but you haven't got anything on me, have you?
Not that I'm aware of, but I'll check tomorrow.
That's my biggest fear, you see. You come in here and then tomorrow it's front page. Listen, you've just been to the Pride of Britain Awards for ITV, which will be on tomorrow night. Let's talk about that first. How was it?
Brilliant. It's one of the few ceremonies at events like that I ever go to. I've been going for the 7 years. It's the 7th year this year, because it's all about ordinary people and the wonderful things that ordinary people do in all kinds of areas. And it's a breath of fresh air. It just reminds us, there's some wonderful things going on out there in the country, and there's an awful lot of people that make us very proud to be British.
It reminded me today of that when I saw Carol Vorderman talking about it, because we're wrapped up in this media world full of lovies and free champagne, and then you realise what the normal people do, and when you find out the lengths people will go to help people and save their lives is remarkable.
Absolutely. I mean, and there's not all good news in the press, unfortunately. In fact, we're often reminded of the worst all the time, whereas there's so many people out there doing so many wonderful things all the time. So an award ceremony like this is a breath of fresh air, and it's lovely. It's great to be part of it and just go and watch and listen.
Let's talk about you. You got this new book out, which is in the top 10, so congratulations on that.
Thank you.
That's a real achievement, because there's some stiff competition around at the moment, isn't there?
Yeah, they're all bringing their books out. This, of course, is the best time. And, read all about it, it's called. And what I tried to do is to talk about my life and obviously the things I've been involved with, the stars, the adventures, public relations, family, the whole bit. And fortunately for me, it's doing incredibly well.
Let's start right at the beginning. What were you like as a child? Were you kind of curious then? Because I imagine you to have a very curious mind. You want to know what's going on, or you couldn't really do your job.
Yes, I suppose, like most kids, you want to enjoy yourself and, you want to have your own way. I'm the youngest of four, and, mum and dad, it's different times. I was born in the mid-40s, 1943 to be precise. And, it was a very different life in those days. We were a relatively poor family, but we didn't realise that because everybody was in the same boat. But, of course, a good thing about that a long, long time later on is you really appreciate when you've been lucky and just how lucky you are.
Why did you want to do this job? Because, you did different things before this. Was it purely by coincidence?
Pure coincidence, never a plan, Alex. That I got into journalism because of sport, got to know the sports editor of the local papers. I played football and water polo, etc. And he got me a job as a trainee reporter when I was 17 on the local paper, the Merton and Morden News, which is in Surrey. It's part of the South London News Group. Good chief reporter there called Maggie Britton that taught me the ropes. Started a record column just to get free records, brought me into contact, of course, with the record companies. And in 1962, when I was 19, I was offered a job in the press office at EMI by a guy called Sid Gillingham, old mate of mine now, and given an unknown band to help launch called the Beatles that did quite well. So I was a very lucky lad. There I was, right time, right place. We were just press officers. There was no public relations industry in those days. No one had ever heard the term. And we kind of made it up as we went along, and most people would say I've done that ever since.
Were you good at playing the game then? Because it is a game, isn't it, the media? It is a game, getting on here and me getting you and you not wanting to do it, or me wanting you to do it.
No, absolutely right. It's and of course it's become an ever increasingly important game because everything's about image. Whether you're a star or a multinational company or a political party or the royal family, image is very important to your success. So I was extremely lucky just to stumble into a career that has become increasingly, shall we say, influential and therefore beneficial to me.
We've got a ton of people to talk about tonight. Mm-hmm. Let's start with the Beatles, because I think that's the thing that most of our listeners will be curious about. Firstly, in the days when you were working with them, did you know they were going to be as big as they are now, even?
No, you just did it. This was amazing. We were all about the same age in the press office. Sid was a lot older. He was into the jazz and Sarah Vaughan and Ella Fitzgerald and people, so he wasn't that interested. The marketing director of EMI took me to one side and said to me, Max, don't spend too much time on this lot song. They've got no chance. But we loved their music and we loved their energy and personally, particularly, I was a big John Lennon fan because he was the driving force to me. He was the heart and soul of the Beatles, and I loved his sense of humour and the fact he said it as he saw it.
I spoke to a lot of people over the years, and I'm going to put this diplomatically. Ricky Tomlinson, for example, said that they weren't necessarily the best band in Liverpool. I mean, how did you feel about their talent? Because a lot of people have said that they weren't necessarily the best, but they just had a certain charisma.
Of course, that's a matter of taste, but look at the songs. One song after another, number one, all over the world. I mean, my goodness, if they weren't, then, I'd like to know anybody that was any better. There was a lot of very great talent around, just emerging. It was all very raw. At EMI at that time, we were launching the career of Adam Faith and Cliff Richard. 3 or 4 years later, we launched Tamla Motown, an incredibly exciting time. But out of all those great talents, for me, they stood out.
What were they like as people in those days? I mean, did they get carried away with it? I'm curious to know, as an ugly man, what it must have been like being the most sexy guys in the world.
Well, I mean, obviously for them, it was staggering. I remember we flew into America for the very first time, and of course there's thousands of kids at the airport, and George Harrison, who I was sitting next to, leant across and said, "My goodness, there must be somebody famous coming in. Look at them." Genuinely not realising that they were there to see them. So for me, it was an incredible adventure that I was just very, very lucky to tap into. My part in their success was non-existent, but they helped me tremendously because everybody in the world that needed to make contact and find out what was going on had to come through the EMI press office. So we built up tremendous contacts from day one.
Was it as important then to get on the radio and to get the press releases and get in the showbiz columns as it is now? Was it? Can you compare it at all?
It's totally different. Early days, and if you knew 12, 13 people, 14 people in the media, you had the whole country covered. On the national press, the same guy did showbiz as music, as theatre, as entertainment, as rest. Now they've got loads of different people. So it was a much simpler process, a much gentler, much nicer process. People were much, much nicer in those days. Journalists, some of them are actually quite nice people. And they weren't even cynical then. So it's all changed tremendously. But I was just fortunate because, when we were learning, there was a lot of much friendlier, much nicer people around, and you kind of learnt as you went along with them.
When you were a PR man in those days, how easy was it to help people like the Beatles? Did they want your help, or did they think they were doing their bit and you were almost hassling them?
No, I mean, I think, they were very easy to work with. And I stress this was in the very early days because as they took off worldwide, so they had their own team of people and we had less and less involvement. But for the first year or two, we worked closely with them, myself and everybody in the EMI press office. And they were lovely to work with. They were having a wonderful time. You couldn't believe what was happening. But again, at the same time, there were loads of other people at EMI that were also enjoying huge success.
How well were they treated by you guys? I mean, today you get the penthouse suites, you get the private planes. Were they treated as well in those days?
No, not in the very beginning, no. I mean, this is a system that's built up over the years. It was all very much in its infancy, and they did okay, but nothing compared to today. I mean, when you have the kind of success that they had. But of course, after a year or two, they're having huge success everywhere in the world, and of course, everything, the riches that followed.
Yesterday, we were celebrating the life of John Lennon, who would have been 65 yesterday.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, did you get to know him? What was he like? What was he like to work with?
No, I mean, we have our own stories, but you didn't really get to know them because so much was happening so quickly. And obviously they were busy conquering the world, and we were busy launching not just them, but loads of other people at the same time. But I mean, John to me was the leader. He was the one that was really the driving force. Paul, incredibly talented. George, shy. Ringo was just Ringo. But he was always my favourite. And I suppose also I liked the fact that he didn't suffer fools gladly, that, he knew when they were giving him rubbish, and, when someone said, "I always believed in you," and he said, "That's just rubbish. A year ago, you didn't want to know us." And to me, that was a breath of fresh air.
Where were you the day John died?
I mean, I don't remember. Obviously things had moved on an awful lot, and by that time I was kind of busy travelling all over the world looking after all kinds of stars and companies and doing PR for, the kind of some of the people that I represent now. I mean, the Sinatras came along, the Muhammad Alis, Brandos, all these people. So, it was a kind of, they were a tremendous help to me in the early stages, but then the busier I got, and I was out on my own, obviously building a business, building a career. So, the quicker time just flashed by. So I honestly don't remember But, I remember obviously feeling, that the tragedy of someone so comparatively young and so talented, and thinking what a terrible waste from someone who just wanted to be famous. And I was the guy that shot him. Tragedy.
Will there ever be another Beatles? Will there ever be another phenomenon as big as the Beatles?
Well, of course, you can never say never, Alex, but you can't see it because it was a totally different age. Everything was just emerging. And when you think of the success they had worldwide, record after record after record, album after album, you can't ever imagine. I mean, today it's a hugely successful, sophisticated business. Then it was very raw, incredibly exciting. And I can't imagine you can ever achieve anything like that again because it's a different age now.
What's your favourite Beatles song?
Well, I suppose I think back of Love Me Do with great affection because, of course, it was the beginning. And when we first heard it, we thought wonderful. And most of the people at EMI were saying, oh, yes, so much for that.
Do you have any guilt whatsoever when the nasty people get brought down?
No, I mean, I won't say I lose too many night's sleep when I think about Jonathan King getting caught out, Gary Glitter, even Mellor. It's the hypocrisy often of these people, particularly those in position of power. I don't care if they've got a mistress, but when they start lecturing us about family values, when they start pretending and hiding behind an image which is totally false, and they're in a position of power and they're telling us this is how you should live your life, I'm living mine totally different, but you don't know that, then but for every story I've broken, there's 10 that I haven't.
That's the interesting thing we're going to talk about in a minute. But with people like Archer and the big people you brought down, have you worried about your own safety? I'm not saying that any of these people would harm you, but the minute that you're doing this and exposing people, surely it's got to make you slightly nervous.
Well, the reality is, over the years, I've had death threats on several occasions. But I suppose it's the way you're made, isn't it? For me, you stand up to be counted. Normally, the people that threaten aren't the ones that do. I mean, one day I'll find I was wrong. But until then, if I see it, I'm going to shout up for what I can. And I'm in a position where sometimes I can.
You run an international, hugely successful business. How does it work? What happens? Do I come to you with a story?
Yeah.
Or do you ring me? What happens?
Well, people come to me. But first of all, Alex, the stories are 20%. The biggest part, 75% of my business, is PR and has been since the 60s. I started out on my own when I was about 27. I think it was 1971 or something like that. And I'm doing PR for Simon Cowell, but for a property company, a health and beauty company, a financial company, worldwide. We launch TV programs, we launch movies, we launch books. So the bulk of my business has been and always was PR.
And for those who don't know, what is PR?
Public relations is creating an image. It's promotion, it's protection, it's getting the image across which is most successful to you as a film star, a pop star, a judge on a TV talent show like Simon Cowell, or a major company.
You see, you've done a great job with Cowell, and I'll tell you for why. I go out to America a lot because I love it. And the perception when he went over there was the same when he launched over here. Just a nasty, arrogant man. I watched it last week. I think he's now more popular than any of the other judges. People just love him because...
It always has been. But, I mean, the reality of it is people see it for what it is. He says it as he sees it. He honestly says it as he sees it. But he's a nice guy, Simon, and he hasn't changed. There's nothing remotely flash. Puts back. He's always the first to come to the children's hospices or hospitals.
But his PR's changed, hasn't it? And you've worked on that so that now there's a tongue-in-cheek now that there wasn't necessarily there in the beginning.
That's the reality of it. We needed the impact. I mean, it worked in this country. We went to America, and to be honest with you, Alex, we all thought we'd be back in 3 weeks. English guy goes over there insulting the Yanks, telling them they're rubbish. We'll all be kicked out of the country. Fortunately, it turned around, and now it's one of the biggest shows in American television history, and Simon is the star of the show.
What about his private life? Because there's a lot of rumours go about, and I know you've been asked about this an awful lot, which is almost self-perpetuating, isn't it, in a way? Is he gay, isn't he gay? I mean, he has his trousers very high, and...
Well, I promise you, no question. If Simon has a problem in terms of sex, it's nothing to do with men. It's just that he likes the ladies an awful lot, although, of course, I stress that as he's been involved with Terry for the last couple of years, he's quite on the right down.
Why would he do that? I don't get that, you see.
Write down,
yes.
Get involved with Terry.
Both. I don't understand. If you're the biggest star in the world, again, I say it about the Beatles and everybody, I'm an ugly man that never gets laid.
Oh, bless him.
And I'm not very big downstairs either. If you could do some PR on that, I'd really appreciate it. But I don't understand why you would want to be in a relationship if you're that big. You can have anybody.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously, him and Terry got on incredibly well. I think that, in terms of the future, we will see. I mean, none of us thought it would last as long as it has, but it goes on, and he seems very happy, and she seems very happy. So I suppose really that's what it's all about. What the rest of us think, well, so what? I
think he's a genius for what it's worth. I think he's created something that is unique on telly. It's actually unmissable TV.
But more important to me, he's not changed. And that's lovely because it doesn't often happen. Stars become, absolutely egomaniacs, so many of them. And when someone comes along like Simon, who doesn't change, it's a breath of fresh air.
We've got a ton to talk about. Are you okay to stay with us for a little bit longer?
Yeah.
We're going to talk about some more of the sleazy stuff, the Rebecca Losers of the world and people like that. And I must ask you about James Hewitt that you write in the book. Big question coming after 11. But I'm going to play a song now that you asked us to play, Eloise, by Barry Ryan. Why this song and what's it got to do with you?
Well, Eloise was actually by Paul and Barry Ryan. Unfortunately, Paul died about 11 years ago of cancer. But Paul and Barry I was involved with in the early days. I was actually with them in a little flat when Paul wrote with Barry Eloise. He didn't read music, so he painted the keys of the piano different colours, and it da 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 da, which was blue, blue, red, 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 yellow, yellow. And then a guy called Johnny Arthey came along, put it into music, and the next thing there's a 60-piece orchestra, and it was number one in Germany for months, and number one I think over here, huge hit all over the world. Barry's been a mate ever since, and in fact Barry did the front cover. He takes pictures as well as working still, doing gigs, particularly in Europe. He took the cover for my the picture for my book, took the photographs for my book. So,
And what a handsome man you are, Max Clifford.
Yes.
I mean, there's a man that looks 40 years younger than your real age.
It's amazing what you can do with a touching up.
It's and have you been touched up recently?
No, unfortunately, but I'm hoping.
It's on Virgin Books, and it's called Read All About It. It's the new autobiography by Max Clifford and Angela Levin as well. We're going to be back next talking about all the stories that we've all spent hours and hours over those water coolers talking about. And that's what you're about, really, isn't it? Talkability and getting people talking about anything.
Well, I mean, I suppose I've been lucky in as much as in the last 15 years I've been in the middle of a lot of huge stories, even though it's the tip of the iceberg of what we actually do.
Now, let's go through a few names and some stories that have been huge around the world. Rebecca Lose. Now, this is probably one of the biggest stories in the last 10 years, maybe?
Mm-hmm. Tabloid story, yeah.
Now, help me with this. What happened with the Rebecca Lose story and what was your involvement?
Rebecca phoned me initially as in, we were giving a false name, making inquiries about what the British media knew about David Beckham and what had allegedly been going on with a certain young lady in Spain. Not telling me, of course, she was the lady, but and I explained to her that there was suspicions, but certainly there was no evidence of anything. So fine. Another couple of months went by, and she phoned me back then as herself and said, "Look, my name's Rebecca Lose, and I need to come and see you because I have a story concerning David Beckham." And obviously, she came to see me. I spoke to her. I then introduced her to the news of the world, and obviously, the rest, as they say, is history.
How do you trust that she was telling the truth?
Well, it's very simple that a newspaper has to prove it, particularly when you're dealing with someone like David Beckham, who is immensely rich and has the lawyers and everybody looking after him and tremendous protection. They have got to prove it, and they've got to take on board that if they can't, then they're going to be sued for millions and millions of pounds. So the newspaper, in this case the News of the World, has to substantiate it and prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt.
How can you prove it?
Well, I mean, obviously they heard messages, they saw all the information that Rebecca Lose brought and all the information, and the story appeared and no one's been sued since.
You see, I find that incredible that somebody so famous and so allegedly intelligent about what he's doing would be stupid enough to send text messages and to do emails. I mean, that was his biggest mistake, wasn't it? Bigger than actually sleeping with her, because if he hadn't have done that, surely it wouldn't have come out.
Absolutely. I think it was the text messages that, if you like, confirmed everything and confirmed to the news of the world the allegations that she made. But the biggest part of my business is protecting stars, so I probably know more about these kind of things than most, because, of course, you are poacher and gamekeeper.
What conscience do you have about the fact that 3 children could not have had a father after that, or at least living in the same house as their mother?
Well, I mean, I know you to put it that way, Alex, but the way I look at it is that, you have massive protection. You know that you use the media as a part of your success and part of your earning capacity. Therefore, if you get caught out, you've only really got yourself to blame. David Beckham didn't suffer because of it. Certainly his popularity wasn't affected. Victoria Beckham got masses of publicity, which in my view she absolutely craves. And Rebecca Lewis was obviously condemned, as you would expect, as a Scarlet Woman, but she knew that was coming anyway. And she was very happy that she had a year television and made a lot of money. So, to me, there weren't really too many losers, and it hasn't caused him any aggravation, and they're still together.
Do you sit down and warn these ladies about the implications of what they're going to do and what the reaction is likely to be from the public?
I mean, what I will say is, look, this is the pluses and these are the minuses. If I get involved, often I don't get involved because I couldn't justify being involved. But and probably, again, for every story I've broken, there's been 3 or 4 that have said, oh no, I couldn't stand that.
Why would you do that then? Why would you say yes to Rebecca Lewis but no to someone else?
No, you're missing the point. It's their choice. I will explain to them, this is what you will gain, but everyone else, all the other papers that don't get your story will attack you. A lot of people will criticise you. You have to have a very broad back, and a lot of people think, oh, we couldn't do that.
Do you like somebody like Rebecca Lewis, or is it just nothing to you? Is it just on emotion because you can't get involved?
I think you see them for what they are. If I don't like them, I won't get involved with them. But I also look at the situation with David Beckham and think it's not going to cause him any problems. And of course it didn't cause him any problems.
Some people would say she's just a money-grabbing bitch, really. Yeah,
a lot of people have said that. But that's up to them. And again, if you don't want to read it, don't buy the paper.
And a lot of people do.
It's the biggest selling paper, and the circulation of the News of the World went up considerably during the time it came out, and of course every other paper followed up on the story.
I get criticised all the time on this programme for slagging off people like Vanessa Feltz, and I pick my targets carefully. I'll call her a big fat pig, because I think she is, because she came on TV and for years and years and years said, I'm happy with who I am, then she gets dumped by her husband and loses 15,000 stone. Now, I think if a celebrity does that, they have the right to have the mickey taken out of them. Fern Britton, for example, I would never do a joke about, because I really like her and love her, and she says it as it is, and she hasn't proved herself to be a liar. And isn't that the point of being a celebrity now, that you actually can't break the rules, which is, if you're going to say something, you've got to stick by it?
No, that's not true at all, Alex. There's an awful lot of people that hide behind an image which is totally false. A lot of the biggest stars in the world, if you knew them for what they really are, they bear no resemblance to the image that everybody believes. So I'd like to say that that's true, but it's totally wrong.
So we're all a bit gullible, really?
I think that most people are. And of course, public relations plays a big part of that. Whether you're working with a political party or a prime minister or the royal family or whoever it is, you create an image. And often that image has got very little to do with reality. That's PR.
Something I like about you is you say that it's every case on every case. You won't just judge a book by its cover. You'll say, well, hang on, I don't like you for this reason, or there's a reason for the public interest that you should let this story go in the press.
Easy example what I'm saying. I was happy to, if you like, contribute to people seeing David Mellor for what he was, because he was lecturing us about family values. He was part of the Back to Basics team with John Major. But there were plenty of other politicians, Labour and Conservative, that people came to me and said they're having affairs. I'm not interested. They're not lecturing us. They're not pretending to be something they're not. They're not hiding behind the family man image. So good luck to them. There's a lot of the nicest people I've known have been adulterers.
As David Blunkett had a hard time recently. Do you think he's been treated fairly?
Well, I think that obviously that whole story didn't do him any favours. But of course, if you're in that position, then you're there to be shot at, so to speak. And of course, there's a lot of strong Tory media that are very anti-Labour and know the damage that sleaze did to the Conservatives, so would love the opportunity to, get that name attached to that description attached to the Labour Party. That's the way it works.
We're going to talk about created press in a minute, those stories that are set up, and whether you would get involved in anything like that. But let's take a call. We've got Al on the line, who's calling from Ilkeston. Al, what do you want to ask Max Clifford?
Good evening, Max.
Hello.
I'd like to ask you about Gary Glitter. Arguably a great pop icon of the 70s.
Absolutely.
But what he did, the paedophilia that he was found guilty of, was roundly condemned by the whole world, apart from perhaps other paedophiles. And the question I'd like to ask you is it more important for you to destroy the icon, or more important to deal with the issue that was raised by Gary Glitter? Totally
the issue. I've spent many years exposing paedophiles all over the country, a lot of them totally anonymous. It's something that obviously means a lot to me, and because people come to me, ordinary members of the public, unfortunately they trust me, I'm able sometimes to put the spotlight on these people. I mean, there was a whole team up in the northeast that are now in prison, so it's not because they're famous. You speak as you find.
Yes.
And with Gary Glitter, because people came to me that were very close to him and were dreadfully upset about what they knew, obviously, I did what I could to show him up for what he really is.
With hindsight, would you have dealt with the matter differently? Could you have actually turned it around to say this man was obviously sick, and could you then have used it to highlight other problems? Or do you think that by just totally destroying Gary Glitter and forcing him into exile, it actually tended to push the problem further under the carpet?
No, I mean, quite the opposite. Putting it under the carpet. Up until then, he got away with it. After that, he couldn't get away with it. After that, if Gary Glitter was around you and you had young children, you were cautious. Before, you weren't. So I think I did the right thing, and I'm happy that I played a small part in bringing Gary Glitter out in his full glory.
Al, thanks very much for your call. Thanks very much for your call, Al. I couldn't agree with you more, and I think these people should be exposed. Is there ever a case, though, where you would think, no, let's just leave them be? Or if I told you today and gave you the evidence, no matter who they are, how big they are, would you reveal it to the press? Because that's your moral duty, if you like.
It depends on... Look, I have a PR business. This is just something that I've tapped into over the last 20 years because more and more people, members of the public, come to me. And sometimes I'm in a position to do something. But, I make up my own mind. And if I'm comfortable with a situation and I believe that, this should be shown up, I do my best to do that. Unfortunately, often I can.
Got Jane on the line. Hello, Jane.
Hi.
Hi, what do you want to say to Max?
Basically, I don't agree with people doing character assassination on, and taking people's private life into the open forum, into the public forum.
So you don't think paedophiles should be shown up, Jane? Don't you think possibly families need protection from them?
I'm talking about David Beckham. I mean, was there any need, to show him up?
Well, we didn't actually, love. I think he was possibly responsible for his own situation. If you're a major star and you're playing away, allegedly, and you get caught, I don't really think you've got anybody else to blame because you're in the media spotlight and you know that you use the media all the time to help build your career, to make money. So I don't think you've got too many complaints as and when, and if you get caught out, that's just facing up to reality. As I say, most of my business is about protecting major stars, but if they get caught with their pants down, so to speak, I say, well, you've only really got yourself to blame.
But do you not think that, we as a nation can't celebrate anybody's success?
No, I agree with that. And I've just been at the Pride of Britain Awards, which goes out tomorrow night, which is all about success and people, ordinary people, doing wonderful things. I'm a great believer in that. I'm a great believer in trying to bring out the good things about British society and the good things that people do and the kindnesses that people do. But the fact is we are obsessed with stars. The media are obsessed with stars. And it sells newspapers, like it or not, when they're caught out, which is why people, buy papers. So if the public stop buying it, the newspapers will stop doing it.
Jane, thank you very much for your call and putting it to Max Clifford. Thank you.
All right. Yep.
Thanks, Jane. Bye-bye. Something that dawned on me this weekend, there was a tragedy this weekend, and nearly 20,000 people died. I'd love to do a survey in Leicester Square now and find out how many people know about it. Yet on a Sunday, you break a story like the Rebecca Lewis, I bet there's not a person in the country who doesn't know about it.
Well, I mean, to be fair, if anybody had watched television news yesterday, BBC, Sky, ITV, it totally dominated the news, as of course it should do. But I do think more and more people, if you like, are looking for a bit of escapism because, unfortunately, there's so many tragic things going on all the time. There's so many horrendous things going on all the time, and people get to the stage where they just don't want to know about another tragedy.
I think you're quite right about that. I mean, the tsunami was a good example, wasn't it? I think we're all tragedied out in a way.
And the fact is that we as a nation, I think, probably the most supportive, the kindest of everyone, comic relief, all of these things. You know, we've given hundreds of millions all over the world. I think we as a nation have shown that we help, we do whatever we can. But I do think that, generally speaking, people don't want to keep reading about tragedy all the time. It's too hurtful, too upsetting, too tragic. So, you know, you can argue, but again, in a democracy, if you want to buy a paper, you have the right to choose. If you want to read, and I mean, it was in all the papers today, but obviously we tend to trivialise so many, things that are so trivial get a massive amount of attention. But as long as it sells papers, that will continue.
Finally, on the PR front, my mate Ken Dodd is a man who believes when the front door closes, the front door closes. Doesn't do any press and therefore doesn't leave himself open. He doesn't go to any openings. He doesn't go to any press nights. He doesn't do anything. He keeps himself to himself. And you very, very rarely read about him in the papers ever. Certainly since the trial anyway. Can you as a celebrity do that? I mean, is it possible in this world now to want to be a big celebrity and successful without being in the papers every day?
Yes. Yes, it is. I mean, the big stars don't need it. The really big stars, the papers tend to put you in whether you want it or not. But you certainly don't need to do the interviews. You don't need to do it because you're in that position. There's a million of wannabes. There's a million of so-called celebrities, the people that go on the reality shows, people that are famous for being famous, people that, have got very little talent but huge egos. And of course, they're fighting all the time. And there's more and more of them who desperately want their 5 minutes of fame, which is, I suppose, quite sad. A bit like going to the zoo. There's more and more people in there trying to perform to get your attention.
Aside from rape and paedophilia, is any publicity good publicity?
Oh, no. I mean, it's an often used quotation, Alex, but it's totally wrong. I've given examples in my book of lots of people whose careers have been destroyed by bad publicity. Sometimes they didn't deserve it either. All publicity is good publicity is totally wrong. I mean, people's lives, their careers have been destroyed. People have committed suicide because of bad publicity. So, no way.
I was talking on Thursday night about this alleged rape with a certain football player from a certain football club. And normally, as was the case a couple of years ago when I was in Leicester, they named the players from Leicester City and they were later proven to be totally innocent. And I believe there is now got to be a debate about you shouldn't name anyone until they're proven guilty. How do you fit with that?
I think that on both sides, because I think that, having said that, just the allegation can destroy people's careers. I think that generally speaking, when it comes to rape, the law is totally tipped against women. There's an awful lot of women that won't report it because of the embarrassment of standing in court and the man say all kinds of things about them and getting his mates to stand up and do it. I think that for every rapist that is successfully committed, there's probably 10 that get away with it. Very seldom do women stand a chance. So therefore, I think anonymity for both sides, it would encourage women to come forward and possibly we would get a fairer justice system on that particular area. But I think it's the women that suffer most, not the men.
I was lambasted on Thursday night. We were talking about this and I moved on to John Leslie, who, aside from the cocaine thing, which, let's face it, a lot of people seem to be doing in this business, what did he do wrong to have his life ruined, his relationship ruined and his career ruined?
Well, I think, to be honest with you, with John Leslie, the way he handled the situation, took a problem and turned it into a disaster. Instead of standing up to be counted, he hid. He wouldn't even talk to the people that employed him. So I think that made a bad situation a lot worse. So I think it was as much the way he handled it as what happened in him, having his pictures taken all over the papers or shown all over the papers with cocaine. And one of the things I've tried to teach many of the stars I've worked with over the last 40 years is that how you handle things can make a huge difference.
Why didn't he ask for help from someone like yourself
I don't know. I mean, at the time, I was actually working on This Morning. Used to review the kind of weekend papers on a Monday. So I was around at that particular time, but his way was just to shut up shop. I think he thought it would go away very quickly, and of course it didn't. And the longer it went on, the worse it got. But I do think that had he have stood up and basically said, look, this is me, this is what actually happened, this is what I'm all about, people would have made up their own minds. But he was very popular at the time. Instead of which, by saying nothing, people thought, oh, well, he's not saying anything, so he must be guilty.
A lot of people said to me, oh, cocaine, it ruined his career. It didn't do Richard Bacon any harm, did it?
Well, I think he kind of came back years later. But as I say, he handled the situation very differently. And you know, you look at two politicians. I mean, I think I'm writing the book about the way Paddy Ashdown handled it when he was caught out playing away, and the way David Mellor. And Ashdown put his hands up and apologised and took it on the chin and said, I've got no one to blame, etc., etc. Mellor squirmed and did the family picture, you know, with the very wife he betrayed, etc. And I think Paddy Ashdown finished up more popular than he was before. And David Mellor, they saw, you know, the way he handled it as far more damaging than what happened.
Were you anything to do with the headline Paddy Pants Down?
No. Freddie, Starr's Hamster and a few others over the years, but not that one, no. But Paddy handled it very well and emerged with, if you like, a more popular figure, whereas Mellor has never recovered.
Listen, it's been a pleasure meeting you and talking to you about this new book. It's in your stores now. It's called Max Clifford, Read All About It. There is one final question I have got to ask you about, which has been bugging me for weeks since seeing you on every TV show and in the papers, that I don't really see any reaction to, that to me sounds astounding. You write in the book regarding James Hewitt that he was in a relationship around the time, correct me if I'm wrong, that Diana had Prince Harry.
Well, before she had Prince Harry. Yeah, I mean, what we put in the book is, and Angela Levin, who obviously co-wrote the book with this interview James at length, James came to me years before people were aware of his relationship with Diana and asked me to keep quiet about the fact it had gone on a lot longer than people realised. So we brought it all out because James said I could bring it out, and the fact that they actually had a personal relationship, if I can put it like that, you know, going back a couple of years or so before Harry was born. So that's what comes out in the book. We're not claiming anything at all. We're just saying this is the reality. You know, there's been a lot of actually there's been nothing like the reaction from that particular part that I thought. There's been tremendous reaction to some of the Sinatra stuff, some of the Brando stories, some of the other things I brought out around my own life and what went on, but there's actually been very little reaction to that, and like yourself, I was quite surprised.
When I read it, I was staggered. I mean, I think people can infer what we're saying because we can't say it. But I was gobsmacked when I read that there wasn't more fuss, because particularly the Larry Kings in America, I'm surprised didn't pick up on that and do a huge 2-hour special, because they love that kind of thing.
Yeah, but to be honest with you, James was asked to go on all the major chat shows and said no. You know, said this. I've said what actually happened. That's it, you know.
Will this go on forever? Do you think this Diana question, the James Hewitt question, the Harry question, the royal question, is this just going to continue and continue because it makes people money?
Well, I suppose if it sells newspapers, I mean, obviously there's a whole thing been going on in the Daily Express in recent times, all to do with Diana's death, and obviously it's something that their readers are keen to read about. Most other papers don't write that much about it anymore, but I think there's an awful lot of people out there that will, you know, always want to know, but probably never will know. Hopefully in the book we've managed to clear up a few mysteries and reveal some of the stories behind the big stories.
I haven't finished reading this yet. I'm really loving it. It's a great book. It's called Read All About It. It's by Max Clifford. Promise me one thing, you'll come in again, because we've not had a chance to talk about half the people you've worked with, including Sinatra, which I just would be fascinated to hear about.
There's some great stuff about him, which I think says so much, you know, which, you know, in my early days of the business, you know, I'm lucky. I've worked with people that were legends in their own lifetime. Him, Muhammad Ali, Brando, even the Beatles. And that makes me a very lucky person to get close to people like that.
Why you?
Right time, right place, I suppose. It's, you know, I was just very, very fortunate to have tapped into a business that I love, and you never get 2 days the same. it's been a great adventure, Alex, and I've been very lucky.
Must be trust, though. It must be the fact that celebrities are willing to tell you stuff that they wouldn't tell their own mother.
Well, yeah,
because they know that you're either going to keep it quiet or you'll do what you do to handle it.
When anyone comes to me, basically I say, and this is PR, which is the bulk of my business, if I don't know more about you than anybody else, I can't do my job. And there's no point in you paying me a fortune. Where you waste your money, I waste my time, because if you tell me, I can properly take care of it. So obviously you know an awful lot, some of it incredibly funny, I might add, that loads of other people don't. I mean, there are some stories in the book which I think are interesting, and people are telling me are, without revealing the name, but some of the amazing things that go on behind the scenes when you're working with the huge stars.
I would love to know some of those stories, but we're at the end. We've got to go. We've got to move on. Take a break and come back with some more great music at Capital Gold. Max Clifford, it's been a real pleasure. As I say, a man of a million stories. And I'm sure you've got about another 3 of these books, haven't you, somewhere?
It seems like it. But thanks ever so much, Alex. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
The book's in the shops now. It's called Read All About It. It's by Max Clifford, and he's been talking to us live and exclusive at Capital Gold.